Hello, Internet. It's Daniel with Driving and Dragons. Back today with another reaction video. This time going over to the DM Lair with his urgent message for every D&D player. Now, this is from a couple weeks back. I try not to do instantaneous reactions unless it's kind of a response video to a drama or something of that nature, or comments directed in a specific fashion. I try to give I want the original video to have time to kind of sit there. I know that my channel's not affecting anybody's views at this point. It's not like I've got thousands of followers or anything, but principle is principle, and I would rather have the original channel get all the views they're going to get before they end up coming to see a reaction from me. Because I think one of the worst things that happens on YouTube is you get reaction channels that's all they do, that literally just play other people's videos and they steal views. Because even if you do copyright strikes, et cetera, do other stuff to get rid of them, that viewer's not going to hop over to your channel just to watch the same video they already watched with a reaction, especially if that reaction doesn't add anything. So what we got here is old Luke. He is 100% a D&D homeboy. He publishes adventures in a little e-magazine and that sort of thing. So he is constantly shilling to the 5e D&D community. No problem with that. He produces content, but he does have everything from a very 5e mindset, despite the fact that he does have previous experience with older editions and that sort of thing. But as a general rule of thumb, I tend to like his content outside of the extremely obnoxious skits. And let's see what he has to say about an urgent message for D&D players.
We are living in the golden era of tabletop RPGs. In the wake of the open gaming license scandal, whereby Wizards of the Coast de facto tried to put almost every independent tabletop RPG publisher out of business, they have, in a twist of delicious irony, caused hordes of players to instead flock to those very same independent TTRPGs. Witness the rise of Shadowdark and Knave and Brancalonia. Observe Paizo sell 7 months of Pathfinder 2 core rulebooks in just a few weeks.
All right, so I'm going to hit that on that real quick. I both agree and disagree with this statement. We are in a golden era. We are in a golden era of TTRPGs. And the OGL scandal is a big part of it. It's not the only thing. This happened a little with 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons too. When they got rid of the OGL for 4th edition, it spurred on a lot. As a matter of fact, it spurred on the creation of Paizo. The difference is how ubiquitous and ever-present social media is, how easy it is to push the advertising, and the advent of extremely inexpensive self-publishing allows the market to be flooded with alternatives. A lot of times alternatives you can try for free. So we do have a golden era, and I believe we have a golden era of new games coming out. People who, with the lower barrier to entry that publishing has, you have some people who would have never taken a career as a game designer who are turning their hobby into into good ideas. Same way back in the 70s when Guy Gax and Artisan made Dungeons and Dragons, that came from them looking at inadequacies in. It started with an idea of how to take tabletop wargaming and take it down into like a squad or a team or down to an individual character as opposed to a whole army. They took that idea and then they tweaked it and worked on it, and they launched that idea. But the barrier to entry at that point in time was a lot higher. They got away with it with those early games because, the barrier to entry was high dollars and cents wise, but the barrier to entry in the market was low because it was literally them creating a new market. Then as you got into the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, you were always trying to compete for shelf space against your Dungeons and Dragons and your few handful of other long-lasting games that survived from the beginning. And even those, you're talking Traveler, Call of Cthulhu, Cyberpunk, all this stuff was relegated to a 6-inch section of the bookshelf at Barnes & Noble whereas or at a gaming convention or a small shelf in a game shop, whereas Dungeons and Dragons took up the rest of everything. Now, so in that respect, it is a golden era. Now, where I disagree with him is, I believe he's making a common mistake that happens when people are analyzing financial situations, talking about, oh, they sold 7 months worth of Pathfinder 2 rule books in just in a week or two, and look at all these games that have come out. All these players are flocking to all this stuff. That's not entirely true. Nearly everything he's mentioning is a branch offshoot of Dungeons and Dragons. It's coming from influencers who built a Dungeons and Dragons fan base and are creating Dungeons and Dragons alternatives. It came from, it's Paizo, which is literally a carbon copy of Dungeons and Dragons with a few tweaks. It literally is. Pathfinder First Edition is basically unironically referred to as Dungeons and Dragons 3.75. It's 3.5 D&D with some tweaks and some additions and some progression. And then Pathfinder Second Edition is literally like Dungeons and Dragons 5.1 or 5.25. They basically just beat Wizards of the Coast to the punch on one D&D. And yeah, they've got a blip there, but is it sustained? I don't think it is. I don't think that there's really this sustained interest in new tabletop role-playing games like he's making this out to be. It's really, there was a flash in the pan anger moment that some people took advantage of. And while I think the door is maybe opened a little bit by Wizards of the Coast, I think it's more the door is cracked and don't think you're going to be able to just jump through it. And you've also, the flip side to any golden era is also there's a whole lot of dross and garbage that is flowing out too, where people who have no idea or concept of how to design a game, they just happen to like Dungeons and Dragons, are spitting out just trash on Drive-Thru RPG and other self-publishing sites, which can be a thing that washes away some of these other things. Because you go from Dungeons and Dragons to play another game and it turns out to be utter crap. Maybe, and I mean a big maybe, you try another one and it turns out to be crap. Then you're like, well, this is why I play Dungeons and Dragons and why I'm going to give my money to Wizards, because everybody else is garbage.
Players all across the globe who previously would only play D&D are now trying out new game systems. However, there is a problem, a dire problem, and that's what I want to talk about today. Now, before we jump in, if you're looking for a change of pace,
Nope. I'm purely looking for you to tell us what this dire problem is. We will go ahead and go right past your shilling. So if you want to, go check out his Lair magazine and that sort of stuff, but we're going to get past his ad here.
Okay, so when I go to conventions, I make it a point to try out new game systems. For me, it's one of the few opportunities I get to do so. I've played systems such as Call of Cthulhu, Castles and Crusades, Dungeon Crawl Classics, and more. And since I'm playing a variety of game systems with lots of different game masters, I get a good feel for both the systems and game master styles. However, there is one other thing that I have learned over the years. And to try to explain this, I want to tell you my Call of Cthulhu story. There's a convention that I've been going to every year for perhaps the last 5+ years or so. And there is a game master there who runs Call of Cthulhu games. And he's pretty darn good at it, in my opinion. I've played in several games with him, and they're always very enjoyable. So every time I go to that particular convention, you better believe I sign up for one of his games. However, this one time I didn't sign up for events soon enough, and his tables were all full. So I jumped into a different Call of Cthulhu game run by a different game master. And boy, let me tell you, that was a big mistake. I mean, it felt like a mistake. I probably learned something from it. But let's just say it was a mistake. But my point is this: the game was horrible. And I think we all intuitively know that a game master and the other players at the table, for that matter, can make or break any tabletop RPG, regardless of the game system you are playing. So this is what I'm driving at. This is my urgent message for all D&D players. As you venture forth and explore other game systems, please strive to do this one thing. Don't judge a game system by the game master.
And this is a good piece of advice. It really is. Because a bad game master can ruin just about any game. And a good game master can make even a bad game function. What I would suggest is you just got to be open-minded towards more than one system. You've got to be able to. What I would honestly suggest is you have a game master who's already a good game master, and you suggest to them that, hey, maybe I saw this game system. It looks really cool. Do you think you might want to run it? You already know the game master is solid. Maybe you convince them to run something. I know that's not always going to happen. You're going to have game masters like, look, fuck you. I've already got thousands of dollars invested in my Dungeons and Dragons collection. And that's what I'm going to run because I'm invested in it. But it's worth a shot. And that's really a good way to do it. But yeah, you definitely don't want to judge the system by the game master. But I would also encourage when you're looking, hey, I'm going to try some new systems and whatnot. And you should do this regardless of what the game is, even if you're just a first-time Dungeons & Dragons player. For God's sake, it is one of the player's very few responsibilities in the social contract to look at the books, to look at the system, to read and review how it works, and to familiarize themselves as best they can with the rule system. And if you're already having a bunch of questions pop up in your head when you're going through the rule system, when you're already looking at holes in the system, you know that there's something you need to expect there. But yeah, you can't just pin it all. You don't want to do either. You don't want to pin a bad game system on a good game master or pin a good game system on a bad game master.
Perhaps you're trying out Pathfinder 2 and you're like, this sucks. Well, it might be tempting to lay the blame at the feet of the game system itself. But what if you just got a crummy game master? You see, it may not be the game system's fault at all.
I mean, that's really a bad example that he just picked there because he picks Pathfinder 2. If you're going from 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons to Pathfinder 2, you're not making that big of a jump. You really aren't. There's people who make a big deal out of it, but it's like when people were trying to talk about how different Pathfinder was from 3.5. The only way you can say that Pathfinder is really different from 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons is if you are really looking for nitpicks and minutia, and really all it is some of the better modular rules and mechanics that were developed for 3.5 were just made permanent in Pathfinder. It's 3.5 with some of the modular pieces permanently affixed into the system and a few other minor adjustments. But at the end of the day, there's not enough difference between those two games, and there's not enough difference between Pathfinder 2nd and 5th edition for that really to be the best example he could have picked.
Your game master might just suck, or it might be the other players for that matter. And if you're part of a friend group trying out a new system for the first time and your usual game master is running the new system, remember, there's a learning curve for picking up and running new systems. You got to give your game master time to get a feel for things. Of course, there are games in the old system that they know like the back of their hand are going to be better. You got to give them time. For example, I'm running Pathfinder 2 for my in-person players in our Thieves Abound campaign, which you can watch right here on my channel. And at times, things are rough for us. However, I'm also new to running Pathfinder 2, so of course my games aren't going to be as good as they usually might. One thing in particular that I'm still trying to figure out is encounter creation. I've been using lots of challenging solo bad guys with only maybe a couple mooks or so. And the result is the bad guys are insanely challenging. I mean, I did this all the time in my D&D 5th edition games with absolutely no problem. But Pathfinder 2 is a different system, and I'm discovering that what worked before isn't quite working now as I would expect. So as a game master, I'm actively working on tweaking things so that our games are as enjoyable as they were before.
All right, and he's probably going to go carry on into this, I think, because it's just a natural progression. But when I look at this, I kind of go back to what another branch of what I was saying before. You can't really judge a system, good, bad, or indifferent, on a single session. You really need to play a game for 2 or 3 sessions at least to kind of get a feel for it, to even know if something is a flaw in the game system or if it's a mechanic that you just haven't found a home for yet. I'm going to reference this back to combat sports and fighting. This is something that I know very well in martial arts competitions. There are techniques that you learn that seem pointless or very hard to get. You just can't make them fit. You don't find ways to use them. And then eventually, all of a sudden, it just clicks. You find the right hole, the right counter, the right situation to use that technique, where suddenly it all fits in place, and now it's just part of your arsenal, and you love it. I'll use a very brief example. Is a basic martial arts technique is a back fist. And a back fist is not while in like point fighting competitions, and a lot of times it gets taught as like a primary attack. It's really kind of stupid as a primary attack, but it is a very weak punch. It's a very weak strike. It is nowhere near as powerful or as potent as a jab or a hook or any other number of front leg strikes. But it has the advantage of being something that is extremely quick, does not require a lot of specialized positioning, and it fits very well coming off of parries and counters as a quick strike to get somebody's attention away from the real follow-up counter, or to cause damage or to move defenses out of the way of a more potent overhand or straight reverse punch. And if you don't know that, you could throw it out and say, oh, it's garbage. Same thing with these game systems. You may have mechanics in it that just seem stupid and clunky and poorly done. You don't really know until you've been through, say it's a combat mechanic, and you've been through 4 or 5 combats, and 4 or 5 different kinds of combats, not just 4 or 5 actual combat scenes or scenarios, but different combats, whether it's, running gun battle, pin down behind cover, close in melee, close quarters combat, any siege, any number of different scenarios that could come up that could change the tenor of the battlefield. All of a sudden, a mechanic might make a ton of sense, say, when you face a flying enemy, and that one change, like, oh, I see how this mechanic is supposed to work now. You can't get that if all you do is play one session and then throw the baby out with the bathwater because you spent 4 hours, 3.5 of which was flipping through rule books.
And by the way, I had a realization the other day for how I might fix this particular issue, and I think it's going to improve things a lot for us. But my hope is that my players are careful not to judge Pathfinder 2 by what they've experienced thus far. I mean, I'm still learning and improving how I run the system. You see, even veteran game masters need time to adapt to new systems before their games are on par. And now I have a very targeted message for my fellow YouTubers and influencers. I know a lot of us are trying new game systems, Pathfinder 2, Dungeon Crawl Classics, Shadow Dark, etc. My heartfelt request is that we are careful with what we say, bearing in mind that what we communicate in our videos and live streams and tweets carries a lot of weight. We should always be cognizant of the impact our words might have on a company and its employees that create a game system. Sure, maybe we didn't enjoy X game system when we tried it out. Maybe it wasn't our cup of tea. However, maybe, just maybe, it was because of our game master and not the system itself. Look, I'm not trying to tell anyone how to do their job. All I'm saying is that for us, it's important to not judge a game system by the game master, especially if we plan to do videos or talk publicly about our experiences. Anyway,
I mean, that really only kind of applies to big influencers and whatnot. To be perfectly honest, I think game masters are actually probably worse than influencers. yeah, you might have somebody like Luke who has tens of thousands of subscribers, hundreds of thousands of subscribers that listen to him on a review or listen to what he has to say about a different system or a different rule setting. But to be perfectly honest, if your game master is not going to have an open mind, game masters not having an open mind are going to pollute far more than any influencers do. Because if the game masters won't run the system or half-ass run the system, that's going to kill them faster than anything else. Which is why I said, hey, have a player go and present it. But hey, I think this might be cool and stuff. But if your game master's just pushing back against it, you're going to have to find a different game master if you want to run that system. Or maybe, crazy idea, offer to run it yourself, even if you're a rookie game master, even if you've never been a game master before. Sit down, read the rules, and say, hey, I really want to try this out. I'll run it. Give that game master a chance to be a player for once. But game masters are kind of there's a loose-knit community there, and it's a lot smaller than you think. And you get on some of these forum boards and start trashing the system, people will start picking up on the negative and running with it real quick, and that's going to steer some people away from playing it.
Wait, that's just what I think. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Oh, and if you missed out on our Secret Art of Game Mastery Kickstarter, pre-orders are now available for a limited time.
Okay, so that's just all his advertising stuff there. All in all, I agree with a lot of it. I don't think it's such an urgent message for every D&D player. Really what it is I'm a big believer that you should be open-minded, that you should go out and play different games, that you should be open to other systems. I believe variety is the spice of life. You don't want to just play Dungeons and Dragons every time you pull your dice out. And I'll actually give you a good example is I detest 5th edition. I find 5th edition to be utterly unenjoyable and unchallenging, and to be missing out on a lot of everything good about tabletop role-playing games as I know them. However, one of my players wanted to run a campaign in the Everyday Heroes system, which is basically D20 Modern 5th edition. It's based entirely on how 5th edition works. And I had a blast playing that game. It actually fit really well with it has some 5th editionism in it, and it definitely has some serious cock your eyebrow type moments and some of those glaring holes, but not as bad as it is in Dungeons and Dragons. It definitely has its place and works and had some fun to it. I would not have been able to do that if I'd have gone in closed-minded saying, oh, it's just another 5th edition game. Screw this. So all of us, whether we are game masters or players, need to approach these things with a more open mind and need to look at some more of these games. And I kind of disagree with him at the very end when he's basically talking to influencers, because there's only really a handful of big influencers in the tabletop role-playing game space. Almost all of them are D&D hacks or critters. And they're either married to Dungeons and Dragons or they're critters, which means they're going to follow whatever Critical Role does, and they're not going to rock the boat very much. Or they're a combination of the two. You've got a few that are pissed about the OGL situation, mainly because they built their careers on what the OGL allows them to do. And they're lashing out and doing new systems and stuff like that. But I really don't think they have as big an influence as he's making out they do. You have a much stronger influence if you are a presence at a local game shop, or if you're a game master for multiple groups, or if you're somebody who really treats this as a hobby and not just a casual player who plays every now and then and it's fun and you don't ever think about it between sessions. So I would say this is better advice for local game store owners and, serious game masters than it is for any kind of influencer. Anyway, that's what I've got to say on it. What do you think? Like, share, subscribe, and tell me below. Looking forward to the conversation. I'll see you guys next time.